Janet. Good morning, everyone. The great Irish playwright Oscar Wilde once asked in one of his plays the question, "What is a cynic?" I think you'll recall the answer. He said, "A cynic is someone who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing." And I think this dynamic describes a lot of what's happening in agencies today, is that we have a pretty good understanding of what our costs are. In fact, I would say that we have armies of people dedicated to tracking, estimating, defending our costs, don't we? But the question that I'd like to ask is, who exactly do we have at our firms who are estimating, tracking, and defending our value? And unfortunately, this is a pretty lonely job because in most firms, actually no one's doing that. We haven't formalized that the same way we formalized finance and accounting. And so this is, in my view, not understanding our value and how we create value is the cornerstone of our profit challenges. The way this plays out in our client relationships is that clients are agitated. They're agitated by the way they pay us and how much they pay us, in part because they themselves are under such great profit pressures themselves. Brand growth has been stagnant in many categories for well over a decade, and this creates a pressure, as you know, on the front lines of marketing to deliver better business results. As portrayed in this piece, I'd like to show you from Adobe. Can we play the video?
You all right?
Yeah. I just got a lot riding on the big game, that's all.
Yeah, I've been there. How much you in for?
4
$4,000?
4 million.
What?
You know, everyone kept saying, look at the data before going all in, but I couldn't help myself. It's the big game.
Man, I thought I was bad.
The scariest part is, it's not even my money. There are gonna be a lot of unhappy people if this doesn't pay off.
Well, what's your bet?
We'll be back to the game after this.
See this cream cheese ad? That's my commercial.
Cream cheese! It's the cream cheese of Spencer, loaded with the essence of the island man. It's Irish.
Get him another drink.
Cream cheese from the island. Start your morning off smiling.
Have you had that feeling? I know our clients do very often. So I think the foundation of our misunderstanding of value is that we price backwards from the rest of the business world. If you think about how we approach this question, we start with the product or service or assignment, the project. We walk around, ask how much time is this going to take, how many people are going to be needed. So we determine the cost, we turn that cost into a price, and then hope that that then has value to our customer. Well, what is that? Is that pricing? That's not pricing, is it? That's just costing. And the rest of the business world and all of your client organizations price backward from this, literally and figuratively, in the sense that they start with the customer, don't they? What would the customer of our product or service be willing to pay for this new car we're developing, this new disruptive piece of technology? What is the value to that customer? Therefore, what should be the price? And then they ask the question, what would the cost be to build? So that's a really hard thing for us to get used to, isn't it? That we would wait and look at cost after price, but that's an important change in the way we think. And then you can make the decision, okay, let's build it. That's pricing. And our essential problem is that we conflate these two concepts, don't we? Costing and pricing. Cost and price. We view them and treat them as though they're the same thing, when in fact they're very different. They're two different disciplines. In your client organizations, you have finance that's doing accounting and financial reporting, but you have a completely separate group doing pricing, right? in your client organizations. This is a separate discipline in most businesses. And it's time that this same approach take hold in professional services, because when we look at what costing really is, it's a calculation, isn't it? It's something we can put on a spreadsheet. It's a tactical exercise that a lot of people can do well in agencies. This can be done by project managers, by production people, by finance people. Costing can be decentralized and done by a lot of people. A price, on the other hand, pricing, that's a judgment. That's subjective and contextual, and that's a very important strategic function that's got to be done by people who understand it and who do it well. And so what we believe is that pricing ought to be centralized and formalized and turned into a competency that lives alongside the other competencies and functional disciplines we have in our firms. And we found that one really interesting way to do this, effective way, and fairly easy way to do this, is to form what we call a pricing team, or pricing council, or a strategic pricing team, or value council. There are a lot of different labels you could apply here, but the concept here is this is a small group of senior executives representing various disciplines within the agency. So this isn't just finance, this is creative, this is strategy, this is account directors, this is data analytics. I mean, this can be and should be a multidisciplinary group of people in senior positions who are coming together looking at pricing from a creative, strategic standpoint. And what I'd like to share with you today are the various ways you can think about the roles of these team members. So we've got 6 different areas of responsibility that we refer to as portfolios that can kind of formalize the responsibilities of this pricing team and help you activate, implement new pricing strategies to get this moving inside your firm. So I'd like to review these with you kind of one by one. We're going to talk about these individually, and I'll give you some examples of what each of these areas are about. So let's look at packaging value. This is the foundational portfolio, and it's stepping back and looking at, well, how do we create value in the first place, our firm? We know what our activities are, we know how we spend our time, we know what our utilization rates are, but do we have a good, deep understanding of how we really create value for our clients? And do we do for ourselves what we do for our clients? Because what we advise our clients is, don't focus on features, focus on benefits. And that's medicine that we need to take ourselves. The legendary Harvard marketing professor, Ted Levitt, used to teach his students that no one ever buys a 3/4 inch drill. We buy the expectation of a 3/4 inch hole, right? We want the hole, we need the drill to get the hole. But it's a really good question for us to ask of our own business strategies and our own firms. Are we just selling drills? Or have we stopped to define what the whole is? If you look at the websites of the vast majority of agencies and you click on the About Us section, what are you likely to see? A bullet point list of services. What is that? That's a list of drills. To stop and think meaningfully about how does this translate to a solution is an important first step. So in this portfolio, we want them to not just describe what you do in terms of functions and disciplines and services, but more importantly, how does that translate into benefits and results for our clients? That's what ought to be featured in our About Us section. And this is a fair amount of work, but it's very rewarding and very important to do. I love that the theme, Sarah, that you talked about magic in the machines. This is one of the dimensions of decoupling, the way that our business for some time now has been decoupled, at least in the minds of clients, into, as a IPA white paper some years ago famously said, magic and logic. So there are lots of different ways to do this. This is an example from an independent agency in the US. Fearless ideas, flawless execution. These have different levels of value to our client buyers, don't they? And so we've got to be very deliberate in, okay, how do we separate these two classes of value, and how do we devise pricing that's different for each? So that's part of what falls into this portfolio. And then we have some things that we do, some solution sets that are so valuable, they ought to be pushed a little further and packaged up and sold at a premium. These are things that might be unique competencies to the agency. And I think my experience is if you dig deep enough in most firms, there's a tremendous amount of intellectual capital that can be packaged up and turned into higher value services. So that's part of the foundational work of that group as well. The second area we call professional selling. And this is the idea of fighting fire with fire, matching the professional buyers with whom we deal with professional selling techniques. You're going to hear today from Blair Enns, who's expert at this. And this is polishing our sales skills, learning the techniques and ploys that procurement uses against us. And the first is really easy and really simple and definitely high on my list of things you could start doing this afternoon. And that is change our language. The behavioral psychologists teach that if we want to change our behavior, we first have to change our language. That words matter. And the words that we often use that I'm about to put on the screen are the language of buyers. They're not the language of sellers. Buyers use the words costs and estimates and charge out and rate cards and utilization and FTEs. This is what they want to talk about, but this is not the language of sellers. We shouldn't be using the word cost, but the word price. Not the word estimate, but the word price. So these are really easy changes, and to go through our RFP responses and all the documentation, the client-facing documentation in your firm, and change the language sends a powerful message not only to your clients but throughout the organization that you're focused not on the cost of what you do but the value you're providing to your clients. For example, responding to an RFP, and this is often the scariest moment that a lot of us have. We get the obnoxious template from the cost consultants who say just fill in our template and send it back. For us to resist that and say in a diplomatic way, well, actually we don't work that way. Unlike other agencies, we don't sell time, we sell intellectual capital and business results. In fact, we believe the traditional ways agencies charge works against the best interests of both parties. Hours and time of staff are focused on efficiency, and we don't believe you're buying efficiency, you're buying marketplace effectiveness. And so while we're not going to fill in the template, here's the way we would propose to work with you in a way that aligns our economic interests. We like the idea of every agency on the planet getting in the habit of always presenting options. Some of you have maybe studied this or seen it in other presentations. We could spend an entire day on this, and I could show you many examples. It's a very simple technique that virtually all of your clients use. If you think about the last time you signed up for a software service or took your car to the car wash or did almost anything, what are you presented with? Options. This gives our clients a choice of yeses rather than a yes or no choice. Very powerful technique. And of course, one of the important dimensions of professional selling is that we want to change the dialogue. A lot of us worry about how to negotiate, and that's very important, and there's some people who are very good at it in the room today, and negotiation training is very well worth doing. But we first have to ask the question about what to negotiate. What should we be negotiating in the first place? And while we care about all of these things and should, inputs, meaning hours, FTEs, time of staff, outputs, meaning work and deliverables, outcomes, meaning results, and the price associated with these, what is it that our client ought to have visibility into? Well, we would say that certainly clients want to know the price, they're interested in outcomes, and the deliverables. The inputs, that's our problem. The resourcing and the investment of inputs should be our problem to solve. We've made it our client's business, as David said, through a series of bad decisions and bad habits. We've made it their business, but it's time for us to turn that back around. So that's an important part of this area of professional selling. The third area we call pricing innovation. This is kind of the fun one. This is the idea that we want to charge someone on this pricing team with the responsibility of developing a set of pricing practices that gives some diversity to how we price, so that we don't have just one way we approach a client relationship. When we're asked could you please provide us with your rate card, I would like to see our answer be, well, we don't really have a rate card because we don't believe in selling our efforts. But what we do have is a pricing stack. You've heard of a software stack, technology stack, MarTech stack. This is a pricing stack, a variety of different ways and approaches and methodologies that we can use to work with you. And this is actually a very interesting, engaging exercise to do inside agencies, for which you'll want planners and creative directors. Because what we want to do, and this will make sense if you think about it from a financial management perspective, if all we have in our remuneration portfolio is one approach, a steady diet of cost plus, uniform pricing, it's no wonder that our margins have been on a steady decline. Because if you think how you save for retirement, would you do all of one thing? Of course not. The very basis of successful financial management is diversification of risk, so that you can improve overall margin and overall return, isn't it? So what we want to do is have lots of different ways that your firm is paid. Lots of some variety in terms of risk and reward and pricing approaches. Imagine that each one of these little slices is a different bar on that pricing stack. Would you have better overall margins at year end? Yes, you absolutely would. And I can tell you that the agencies that I personally know that make 2 or 3 times the average profit margin all practice this and believe it. The other thing that this area of pricing innovation looks at is how can we develop some products, how can we productize what we do based on the intellectual property and intellectual capital that already exists, it's already here. And there's a tremendous potential for this, because if all we do is continue to deliver services, and worse, deliver them based on our efforts and hourly rates, that is a chronic low margin, will be in a chronic low margin business. We can, at the very least, and this is actually quite easy, we can at least package those up, turn them into solutions, and turn them into programs. That's not so difficult. And with a little bit more effort, those programs can be productized. They can be turned into actual products that generate new recurring revenue streams. Wouldn't that be nice? Money while we sleep. Little slice of our revenues. The fourth area we call effectiveness orientation, and this is changing the internal mindset away from utilization and billability, my favorite word. I'm sure that's not really a word, is it? Billability? It's my least favorite word actually, to effectiveness. We're in the effectiveness business, not the efficiency business. And so to do that, that means enforcing a process for beginning new client relationships, new assignments, with a discussion of what we call scope of value before a discussion about scope of work. To always, always back up before we get deep into the list of 19 things on a scope of work. Back up and say, yes, but what's the scope of value? What are the expected outcomes? What are we trying to achieve? What are the KPIs? Could we have a discussion about that? Could we have a success workshop? I have on the screen an example of a success workbook done by an agency that insists that all their new client relationships begin with a full-day success workshop involving C-level attendees from the client. Now, do you think that would give you a better sense of the value you're creating as you price this assignment and as you embark on this journey with a new client? This portfolio is also about, for the times that an outcome-based agreement might be right. Not every client is right for an outcome-based agreement. Some are. And for those kinds of clients, what are the metrics of success that we could use given our business model, given our focus, given the type of agency we are? What is a possible list of metrics of success? So that belongs here as well. And of course, the other piece of scope is that if we accept that hours are a poor way to price, then the flip side is they're also a poor way to manage scope. And we make the mistake of defining scope as hours. That's not scope. What is scope? Scope is the deliverables, the time frame, the milestones. That's what scope is. And so part of what we want this group to do is to change that mindset as well. Profit protection, this one will look familiar because this is, we have a lot of finance directors in the room. You do this, but this is the idea of how do we optimize the profits and the margins from the clients we already have. This is the 80-20 analysis. Which of our clients are producing most of the revenue, most of the profits? Which our clients should we try to do more business with? Which should be outplaced? This is something that most firms aren't willing to do, but you should be pruning your client roster every year based on this. And then, of course, identifying who our buyers really are. We make the mistake of assuming that the technical buyer, procurement, is what is called, I'm going to just fast forward here a little bit, is what is called the economic buyer. And of course, procurement wants us to believe they're economic buyer. They will tell us that they are the economic buyer, but they are not the economic buyer, right? That's the person who can write the check. And one of the really effective tools for understanding these different dimensions of different types of buyer is a technique borrowed from web development. And some of you are maybe in the habit of writing personas. If you develop a website, these are personas for the different stakeholders and audiences that you're targeting. This idea of saying, what's the persona of these buyers that we're about to go negotiate with? What are their values? How are they rewarded? What are they looking for? And then finally, the last portfolio we call pricing professionalism, and this is the idea of how do we institutionalize pricing as a core competency throughout the entire organization? How do we send the message that there's a new way of doing things? There's a new sheriff in town. It's not the same process. We're no longer going to take an assignment and estimate the costs and estimate the hours and then estimate the costs and then send it to the client as though that's a price. We're going to do pricing in a modern way. We're going to do pricing based on starting with a question of value first and price before we look at cost. It's a very different process. It's also, this group is also, or this person, responsible for publishing and disseminating tools to the rest of the agency that can help them do a better job in pricing. And importantly, at the end of major engagements and assignments, the idea of an after-action review. How did we do? What did we learn? Did we leave money on the table? How could we do better the next time? So that your pricing becomes a test and learn kind of approach where you're always looking back and saying, how could we have done better? Let's experiment and we'll do better the next time. You're able to also benchmark and track your success in this pricing team concept. If you start with a benchmark as you get your work going, and these can be both quantitative and qualitative to say, where are we now? Where do we want to be? A year later, you come back and take a wave one and see, wow, we really did make some progress here in these areas. So we think that there's some value in not just looking at this as long-term. It certainly is long-term, but there are some things that can be done in the first 90 days. There are some easy wins, some short-term wins that can start to send some real messages of change across the organization. And I love the idea that learning to implement more professional approach to pricing is like learning a new sport. As you practice, the more you practice, the better you get better and better. And what a pricing team helps you do is institutionalize pricing as a competency, practice it, get better and better. That helps us capture more and more of the tremendous value we create for our clients. So thanks very much. Appreciate you inviting me again this year.